Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, a podcast where we explore the intersection of narrative design and game development. I'm your host, Gerald Ford, and today we're diving into a fascinating discussion about the evolution of a writer's voice. In this episode, we're once again joined by the talented Kelly Bender. Kelly is a comic book writer and game designer with a knack for developing unique and compelling voices. So today we're discussing building a writer's voice over time. Kelly, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
You were the natural guy for me to talk to. This has been on my editorial list for a while. I want to talk about voice, and you just came to mind because you have a strong voice and you are well known for character voices as well. So that's where I want to go with this. I usually give you space at the beginning to tell us your origin story. You just did that, so if somebody wants to flip back and check that out, feel free, go ahead. We're not going to rehash that. I am curious, though, just to give us a different twist and to warm us up. When did you first notice that you were developing a voice? Where were you? What were you working on? Can you remember that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I was always creative, right? Like, so even like as a young kid, right? I talked about that earlier in the last chat we did, but yeah, like even when I was like working in childcare, like I was always like innovating things for the kids to do, right? So the childcare I was working on was before and after school programs, and so we would literally have the kids on like PD days or spring breaks or summer holidays, as we couldn't always go to a field trip, right? So I was always thinking of ways to engage the students, and so like. I end up taking a Fear Factor, that's the old TV show Fear Factor, and adjusting it for children. So like, so instead of like eating like, cow's brains, they were eating like durian, or they were eating like, raw potatoes and stuff like that. Right. So, just little things like that. And then, like fun little like twists for that. And I also like played Survivor with the kids. I did Minute to Win It with the kids, which was really, really fun. So just little fun little activities that we did. And we did like a mall I created where the kids actually got to create their own store. I'd buy the stuff in advance, and then they'd get to like work in the store. So every 2 minutes they would work a shift, and then they'd get to spend a shift. And so every shift they worked, they got $1, or like within our coin things, right? It was like in-game currency, and which is funny because I was working on in-game currency back then too. and yeah, then they got to go to other people's stalls and buy stuff, and then go back, and then we do that, and it was a fun little thing, right? And it was really just fun and engaging. And then I also would do like mysteries for the kids. I do brain benders and brain twisters and stuff like that, just to keep the kids engaged and just give them like, like those little moments where they just, you're bored. Oh, try this, or hey, read this. And then and it would be everything from like, like movie trivia or stuff like that. And I just think, like take some screens, and then they'd have to like fill it out by themselves. They couldn't do stuff. And then same thing, they'd submit it, and they get points, and those points could be spent in the in-game, store within my program. It was called the RVS Club. Cause I was working at River Valley School, and yeah, like, and then they get to like buy candy, or they get to buy stickers or pencils or stuff like that. And so it's just fun, creative ways to do it. And then when I became a stay-at-home dad, I wanted another outlet. I didn't know if I was going to go back to being a childcare worker. I didn't know what I was going to do. And so I wanted an outlet. And then I just thought, okay, I like writing. I like creating stuff. Like I started with a dad blog, as you do. So it's just like, there's just like, like places to go around Calgary, and cool pools, and like stuff like that, and recipes and stuff like that. And then eventually I'm like, no, I want to do more than that. And so I started writing, and then I wrote an idea for a movie, but then when I started getting into comic books, the funny thing was, when I read into comic book scripts, I didn't have the voice yet. I had it for movies, which is weird, because when I wrote the movie script, I had the characters and all that. But when I wrote for comic books, the first 2 comic book scripts I wrote were 2 silent stories. The first one was "What's Yours Is Mine," which is a Western story, where you basically go in and it's in a saloon where got another guy walks in, sees another guy, and he pays for his beer, his whiskey with a gold tooth, and then the guy who comes in is going to kill him. He's missing a tooth, and so that was the story. And then the other one was about 2 samurais who were just in a field, and the silent story of them, just the drama and the tension of them getting ready to battle, and then coming down to like one panel where it finally happens, but just building that tension over time. And as the leaf falls down, like the cherry blossom leaf falls down and it lands on the blade, and it literally cuts a leaf. That's how sharp these things are, and the tension in the eyes and all those. And I had it all. I just didn't have a voice at all, so I could scene direct, act, like position the characters, lighting, sound, all that except voice. And then my next story was another short story which is a sci-fi story, and that one was when the voice finally hit me. It's just like the floodgate opened, and they haven't shut up since then, and I'm very grateful for that. But yeah, like that's what exactly how it was just I didn't have my voice, and it was something I just had to develop over time, right? And also, it was not only just developing the voice, and letting them speak to me. And when I write, that's exactly how it is. Is when I'm writing, I'm basically seeing it and I'm hearing it and I'm just feverishly writing it down as it happens. And that's how I write everything. So even when like I'm in a meeting, they start talking and I'm just like, the ideas just start going. And I start like generating, okay, this is a cool scene. This is a cool shot. This is a cool moment, and I'm like, in my head, it's all there. And I'm just like, in the meeting, I'm like make myself notes as it's going along. And that's just how my brain works. I just get creatively inspired by art, by game design decisions, by you name it. And the ideas just start flowing and I just write them down. And then they're always there. That's the thing is like I put them on my notes, and then when I'm ready to develop it, I always go back to it. It's like seeing an old friend. And so like I've got a movie script I'm working on, and same thing. I just an idea comes up, put it in there. And let it sit, let it fester. But I can't go right into it just because of my busy life schedule and all that. And I'm also just not ready there. I'm not at that point where I want to dedicate fully to a movie script. But it's there, and that's an old friend I'll say hi to in a while.
Very cool. I think maybe we need to, for 1 second, set a frame here, because there's the voices in our head, but there's also character voices in a game or a comic or whatever. And then there's also the author's voice. You can tell a Stephen King novel from a Pat Rothfuss novel because of their voice. So in your opinion, what is the difference between the two?
Yeah, so it's the voices of the author as styles. It's what you're inspired by in advance, right? And that's what makes Writers' Room so brilliant and great. And that's also what makes big video games brilliant and great, is because you are getting all this different eclectic voices coming in, right? And that was the thing, especially at Assassin's Creed Odyssey, when we had to edit each other, right? And as soon as I got it, I knew exactly whose script it was, just because of their writing style. Whether it was too much swears, whether it was too comedic, or too dramatic, whatever, right? I knew exactly whose script it was, and that's just because it's who we're inspired by. It's who we've grew up listening to or reading. It's also our voices and a combination of all those things, right? And how we want to get the message across. And so it comes through those things, and that's where the style and the tone comes in, right? And then the character themselves are developed through lots of different things. And we can get into that like deeper. I know you want to talk about gameplay mechanics and all that, right? But character voices and I look at writer's block this way. I'm Anna sitting outside of Elsa's room asking her to build a snowman. That's essentially what it is, right? Is that I'm out there and I'm saying, hey, I'm good to go. Are you good to go? And the voice just hasn't decided to come out yet, right? And eventually it will. And what I'll do is I'll typically go back to my techniques. I'll go back to my strategies that I've learned over time and developed to get that voice and that character to speak to me. And sometimes it's one of those things where it's like, you know what? Okay, maybe that's not the voice, or that's not the character I need, right? And so it's the same way as like, when you get a pet and you name it, it's like, okay, that doesn't feel like a Carl, okay, that's more of a Bob, and
Yeah.
and that's what it is, right? Is that the voice you're trying to force this character into it, and the character's like, no, that's not me, that's not me, do your work, asshole, you know, and then that's what it is essentially, is that the character's just like, no, like, I'm not ready yet. You're not ready yet. You're not doing it right. You're not forcing me into this pinhole. And 99% of the time, the voice inside your head's correct, because you are forcing something, right? And the character's right. And then obviously that'll come through editing. That'll come through, just taking a step back, re-looking at it, rereading it. But that's essentially what it is. The writer's voice is your style, your tone, based off of what but it's also different levels as well, right? So like when I started out, I was at this level. Now I like to feel like I'm advanced and evolved, because I've also learned new techniques. I've also got inspired by more things, different writing techniques for different genres as well, whether it's comic books, movies, or video games. So it's knowing the different tools and the different tricks for each one, and then developing the character over time. And then in video games, we have the difference to develop the characters. I know you want to talk about that in a bit.
What kind of tools or approaches do you use when you've got a new character and you're trying to find what that voice is?
So a lot of the things is just it starts with the design of the character, right? So we'll just talk about general character, and then we'll talk about video games separately because I know you want to get
Yes.
deep into that one, right?
Yep,
So
yep, yep.
if I'm designing a comic book character, for example, I need to know what their look is, what their aesthetic is, what their gender is, what their race is, and also the biggest thing is what their needs are. What do they want? And then what type of character are they? How are they going to affect the main character? And are they a positive force in that character's life or a negative force in that character's life? And all that will help design their tone, and stuff like that. So, for example, if you're going to write a character that is, let's say it's a mercenary type story, you've got, like this group of killers or assassins that are going to do stuff. And then let's say one of your characters is a long range sniper. It's a long range sniper, was in the Olympics. Right. And it's a female that was in the Olympics, and then the question I'll ask is, okay, you're great. You're in the Olympics, which means you're one of the top in the world. But there's a big difference in motivation for that character if they won gold or they lost gold.
Mm.
And that's such a big difference, right? Is that this person's going to have a grudge on their shoulder for the rest of their life because they didn't make that one pivotal shot, especially in this line of work, right? If they're on a special forces team and they're asked to make that one shot and they couldn't in that one moment, the best moment in their entire life, where they're supposed to be the peak of everything, then that's a different motivation. That's a different character, right? And then you start developing that character voice, you start getting the personality, that trope. And so it's a lot of differences you can put in where you can have the exact same character, but if they come from a little different perspective, little different background, little different ethnic background, racial background, religious background, it just adds and adds and adds to who that character is, and that's how you really develop that character's voice, that chip on their shoulder. Whether they're educated, not educated. Street smarts, book smarts. All these little things add up to building who your character is and that voice, and that should come through in your script.
Hmm. How do you maintain that voice when you're working across multidisciplinary teams and you're working with other writers?
Documentation is the most important thing. So what I do is, especially like in video games, when you work on multiple characters across, like sometimes you might develop 100 characters, and then eventually you have to go back and write a story for that character, right? And then what you do is you go through your character bio sheets, right? And that's what you do is you have your initial character design sheets, you have your initial bio sheets, the personality trope, your Myers-Briggs, whatever it's going to be, right? Whatever you've used to develop that personality, you have to go back to that, right? You also have to go back to their bio, their look, their job, all these things, and you just go back and like that's a designer note for you to help build this character, but then it's also a designer note for your artist if you're in the comic books, for your actor when you're in TV, and also for your art team and your design team when you're in video games. And it's also a great designer note and secret, like tool for you when you have to work on a new character or revisit that character, or if a new person joins your team. And you have to hey, just look at these things, get an understanding of who these characters are. And the other thing you do is you go back and reread story, the stuff you've written before on that character.
When you're writing voices for video games, you're dealing with all kinds of world, sci-fi, fantasy, all kinds of weird and situations that don't happen in the real world. How do you maintain realistic, authentic voices in that situation?
So let's start with how you develop a character in the video games and how it's different than, let's say, a comic book or a movie or a novel. The number one thing is it starts with the gameplay. And in that case, a lot of times your combat games, right? That's your close range, that's your mid range, that's your long range, that's your healer, that's your stealth actor or character, and this is where you start with, right? You start with these are the ones you have to fill in the first thing, right? And so even just by figuring out, okay, who's your close range, right away you start developing an idea of who these characters are, what their weapons are, what their jobs are, and then going from there and then developing their backstory, right? And that's the most important thing you have to do is that, because these characters are specific for this story and for this gameplay, right? And that's why you need to develop that first. So don't come in there and just say, oh, I'm going to write this sniper character. And you might have a great idea for a sniper character, but guess what? Your team doesn't need a sniper character yet. Your team needs a tanker, right? You need the demolition guy or whatever like that, right? And so it's great to have these ideas in your head and all that, but then from there, then you start taking your 5, rock, paper, scissors system, combat system. And then you start developing, okay, we need male, we need female, we need different genders, different races, different backgrounds. And then that's where you start developing all those things, right? But it starts with that first thing, which is the gameplay, and the combat system, right? And then from there, then you start adding, different personalities. So from the gameplay, then you add the job, which is within your, stealth, whatever it's going to be, or sci-fi. Same thing. Halo. They all had different combat styles, right? And so you have to start building the personalities around that, and they can be male, female, wherever from, right? But they still have that same type of trope that it comes with that with their job, right? And then from there, then you start building their personalities. But yeah, you start using those tropes, and an easy way to do it is go across the wheel and do polar opposites for enemy characters, similar for like personalities. Start developing that, and those are easy ways to start getting that voice, right? And then from there, then you start listening to YouTube and different characters and who that character is based off these characters, and then develop your own voice from that, right? And then all you're doing is just getting inspired. You're just forcing that voice out, using these systems and these techniques, right? And then from there, you just start going in, right? And then you start building the other characters based off the other systems, your crafting system. That's where you start getting your blacksmiths and your miners and your ore people. And then you start getting your health system, which is where you start getting your doctors and your healers. And then that's where you just start filling this void in, right? And then the rest of it is all just random people that you would see in your everyday community. Like the town crazy, the cat lady, all these things. You just start filling these things in. And then you start filling in the voids and the gaps of what you need as far as diversity, as far as inclusion and all those things as well. And that's where it all begins, and that's where it all starts. But with video games, it always starts with your gameplay system.
From a craft point of view, to back up for a second, are there like exercises? Is there to improve your ability to capture and write voices? Like, do you sit down and just write dialogue for an hour every day for a couple of years, or do you do fill out bark sheets until your eyes bleed, or like is there
yes and yes. It is writing. You get better by writing. I'll say it 1,000 times. Writing is a skill, and in order to improve it, you must train at it, right? And just like you want to run a marathon, right? You don't buy a pair of Nikes, put on a pair of Lululemons, and all of a sudden you're running a marathon, right? You got to go out there, train. Listen to other people, read other people, like look at the articles, take classes, look at YouTube videos, just do different things to improve your craft. Mm-hmm. You can do it by yourself. So writing is a discipline. And so you must practice at it. You must get better at it, right? You don't buy a pair of Nikes, put on a pair of Lululemons and get to run a marathon, right? So you literally have to go out there. You have to train, run 1 block, run 2 blocks, run 3 blocks. And that's exactly what you do. And the easiest way to practice writing different characters' voices is to practice writing character voices. And that's the easiest way to do it. And yeah, it is barks. But same thing. It's writing story and dialogue. And then what I always do is cover up the characters' names. And if I cover up the characters' names and I can tell that they are 2 different characters speaking, then that's an easy way to test it, right? Or give it to your friend to read it and say, do these what is this character's motivation? What does this character sound like? Is this a Snape type character to you, right? Is this a Joffrey character to you, right? And that's where you rely on your tropes, is because they work. And it's also an easy way to identify with these characters on a base level, across the board, even before you get deep into your character and personality. And also once you start with that trope, then you develop it from there. But their voice should stay pretty much consistent unless you do have a major turning point or coming to Jesus moment with the character, where they do have a second opinion on what they're doing and stuff like that, right? But you just develop it. But you just look at different, like an easy way to do it is look at, okay, write a dialogue between a player character and a mentor character, and then write it in the voice you want to do it. Like is it Gandalf, or is it any other character? But then you write that dialogue, and then just write it as a female, change it up and write it now it's a female, or write it as a male mentor character talk to a female character, write it as a female character talk to a male character, writing as a female mentor female character, right? And those are easy ways, right? Like, so the way you look at it is like, let's say you're writing a parent. You're writing a parent character with your NPC, the NPC is a parent, and it's the parent of the player character. Okay, well, is this a controlling parent? Is this an overprotective parent? Is this a caring parent? Is this a judgmental parent? Is it the father or the mother? right? These are 8 different ways you can now write this character, right, and practice for it, right? And yeah, lean on yourself, like if your grandma was the one of those caring people, then that's their voice, right? If your father is like was not like didn't give you hugs and stuff like that, lean on that as well, right? And so these are just easy ways to do it, and then develop just these. To be honest with you, when it comes to storytelling in video games, the NPCs are the heart and soul of your story, because this is where you actually get to have so much fun. I love writing the drunk character. I love writing the Alzheimer character. I love writing the Rain Man type character, or the grumpy old man character, or grumpy old female character, right? And because that's where you get to have fun. That's where you get to add a lot of humor into your game. Where your main character should flatline straight across, right? They shouldn't change. The motivations shouldn't change, and their voice shouldn't change. But when you start adding these other characters, that's where you get to really have some fun with it.
Hmm. You alluded to something. By this point, I'm pretty certain most of the audience are storytellers, and the vast majority are actually writers and narrative designers. So we've all heard the axiom of go sit in a coffee shop and listen. We've all heard go and observe people. But I want to know where you fall on that, because there are other school of thoughts that say dialogue in the real world is not novel dialogue or comic book dialogue, because that's been distilled down or altered, or you found the heart of the conversation. Where do you fall on that whole idea of observe and then report?
I'm both. Where I get it, I understand it. If you need to develop characters, that's a great way to start, right? Working with writers groups, and joining a writing group, on WeChat or Facebook, whatever like that, and meeting up and writing, or whether it's your drink and draws or whatever like that, sitting down and talking to people are great ways to be inspired, great way to do your craft, especially if you need that time to allocate to write, right? If you don't have, then you can't do it at home, where you got too many distractions at home, where you just say, hey, once a month, I'm going to sit down and write with my buddies. Great, do it. That's what you need, right? Go for it. If you want to go, I don't drink coffee. I hate the smell of coffee. I get a headache when I'm in those coffee shops, and so I'm one of those writers who don't actually write in coffee shops. But it's just picking up dialogue and picking up words, right? Like seeing how people react, or like just go on the subway, go on the bus, take those headphones out and just listen. And just get like an accent, get like the way somebody speaks to somebody else, and okay, that's cool. And you don't have to copy their words or exactly what the conversation is, but what you're doing is you're copying the tone, you're copying the communication style, right? And yeah, just work on it that way. And then, yeah, as far as the rest of it goes, it's just like, I'm fine either way if that's what you are and that's what you want to do. I watch a lot of shows. I watch a lot of TV shows, movies. But you're right. They don't just translate. Why? Because in video games, we are trapped by the small UI, dialogue box, right? And so,
Yeah.
and also we have to remind ourselves that yes, you can have a long monologue, but the player's got to tap through that. And you've got to remind yourself, is your words worth that player's effort? Is it worth the player's effort to tap through that, which does become a nuance and a hassle at some point, right? Also, you have to remind yourselves, is it worth the artist and the designer to design that scene for that dialogue? Because that takes time and that takes effort, right? And so that's why it's our job as narrative designers and game writers to choose our words wisely, to pick the right 20 to 25 words as opposed to the wrong 40 words to tell this story, and to have the same meaning, same inflection, same feeling to come across within that one player tap or two player taps, right? And so that's where it doesn't match, right? We don't have time in video games to have a dialogue that is about Royale with cheese. We can't have a Quentin Tarantino, like two guys just talking about, Royale with cheese. We can't do that. Now we can do that we can do that. Well, the problem is it won't be, because as a player, you'll be like, what are they talking about? What does this have to do with what I'm doing? What does it have to do with the quest? And now, that being said, you can bring this stuff in over time, right? You can have an ongoing. So if you're doing a long, quest where it's a couple characters there, you can bring something up and then get the guy go back on term, and then you can bring it round full circle at the end, right? There's no problem with that, right? But you can't waste 4 to 6 or more player taps on nonsensical dialogue, because the player will just run right through it, and then what you're doing is you're creating a lazy player. And the worst thing you could do is a lazy player, and that's by having like your dialogue always be 6 taps. That's by having stuff that doesn't relate to the quest, doesn't relate to the gameplay, doesn't. So every line of dialogue should do one of two things. Okay, and this is coming from Kurt Vonnegut, where he says, the first one it should reveal the character or reveal the story, and the other thing it should do is it should drive the action. And if your dialogue doesn't do that, the players just can tap right through it.
Mm.
And same with your choices, right? Your choices have to have meaningful impacts. The choices have to be, it always can't be, they can't be right or wrong choices, but it should be two polar opposite choices that are based on the player's personality, that they will want to choose one or the other and then have them matter. Otherwise, they're just going to, like, if you played Genshin Impact at all, I haven't read Genshin Impact in a year and a half. I play it every week with my kid, and I haven't read it at all because it's just nonsensical dialogue. It means no sense. It's like those writers must be paid by the word or something, because it's just over too much. And I'm just like, it's like, I'm a writer and I love story and I love storytelling, but there's nothing there. I mean, the voice acting is amazing. I'll give the props to the voice actors. They're absolutely amazing, but it's way too much dialogue, and also there's no choices.
It's brilliant. That's the solid advice that we're looking for. That's the good stuff right there, man. Cool. Let's go back for 1 second. We're almost done. We're almost getting to the end of this, I think, this chewy bit. But I want to go back to the synergy between gameplay and character voice, and how when you talk about the gameplay that is chosen for a character, how that drives the creation of a character. But can it go the other way? Can choices in the game, can the action in the game change the voice? Can a player influence and alter a character's voice?
Yes, but that's a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, and that's why when you look at branching dialogue, it's the illusion of choices. And this is, spoiler alert. Same thing. Your open world isn't that open. There's a reason that mountain's there. There's a reason that water's there. There's a reason that villain who's going to kick your ass is there, right? Because we want to give you the illusion of these things, right? Because we can't give it to you. And so because of budgets, time, scope, all those things, right? So when it comes to branching dialogue, the player will only play through about 60 to 70% of the actual content the first time, right? If they're going to replay it and they want to make different choices, that's what it is, right? Because that's how it works, right? If you make one choice or the other choice, you're only going to see one, right? And that is extra time, that is extra money, that is extra budget, let alone designers, let alone voice actors, let alone all this stuff, right? And so that's the thing, is if we want our video games to be around, $49 for a brand new one, even though they're probably closer to $69 for a brand new one, right? That's the choice that we will make as consumers, right? And so Detroit 99, whatever, I can't remember the name of it. Detroit tried to do it with a bunch of different dialogues and different scenarios and all that, and it was an experiment, and I think it was neat that it did it, but it also, I think the end result was it just was too much, right? And too much cost, too much everything, and same thing, the players don't have time to put in another 200 hours into that game to try and see everything else, right? And so that's the hard part. And so yes, but also, to be honest with you, I think that's where AI will come in. AI will come into the fact where you will get to the point where, and once again, AI will be a tool that people will use, right? It's not going to be something that's going to replace somebody, or it shouldn't, but it will be a tool that we'll use where you will make a decision in dialogue. And the second you get out of dialogue, you will literally see the world transform in front of you based off that choice. And that's where we'll get, or you'll literally see the NPC that you're talking to. They might have the life sucked out of them because of a choice you've made, or healed because of a choice you've made, right? And these are things that we will get through with AI, and using it as a tool, where you hopefully will have that your choices will then pre-generate the world that you're playing in as a result of it. And I don't know many games that have started doing that yet. Obviously we have pre-generated dungeons that change all the time, but it doesn't based off of choices. It's mainly based off of actions. And even then, it's not usually typically player actions. It's just, you've done this, so there you go, you get this, right? Yeah. So these are things that will happen in time and in the future, which I think will be amazing. And especially once we can utilize the tool of AI within the game engine, that is led and driven by an actual human designer, a human artist, to make sure that it's overseen and implemented properly.
Interesting. All right, my friend, let's bring the conversation around the voices to an end, and then we'll move into some fun stuff and a little bit of extra stuff. But just to bring this whole thing to an end, I guess, as an instructor, and you are an instructor at gamedesign.skills.com, as an instructor talking about this topic, what is the one thing that you would want new narrative designers, new game writers to know about creating characters' voices and discovering voices?
So especially when it comes to video games, is you rely heavily on your team. It is a collaboration. You're going to get edited. You're going to get reviewed. So even your design. So if you design a character, you should be happy with around 60 to 80% of that character actually being the vision that you explained to your team, being in the game. Now, part of that is because you just haven't got to the point of being able to collaborate and communicate to your team. The other thing is you also don't know exactly what the team needs are. Once you start collaborating with the team, you get it, then that number is going to jump up to 80 to 90 to 100%, right? But you're going to be edited. And that's the most important thing. If you don't want to be edited, write poetry. That's it.
Still get it.
If you write a novel, well, your poetry will be edited if it's going to be published, right? And that's the thing is, if you're not going to be published, then don't worry about editing, right? And you have full 100% control over it, right? When it comes to collaboration in video games, you are in control of your own work, but that's not your character. That's not your story. It is the studio's story. It is the studio's characters, and you're another support system that helps to develop that and bring that to life, right? And so that's the most important thing is be prepared to learn and grow. Especially if you're going to take a course, right? Like, and I'm doing that right now with my students where we're giving the feedback, right? So they do their first draft. Then they do a peer review off that first draft to each other, right? Why? Because they need to know how to give feedback and they also need to know how to receive feedback. And that's the most important thing because you will do that in the studio, right? If you're doing play tests within the studio, you have to give feedback and you have to know how to give feedback and in the right way. And also we break down exactly what you're giving feedback about. Is this there? Is this not there? How can they improve? It's not like, did you like it? That doesn't help anybody, right? And same when you do a play test, right? It literally will say, it'll give you a list of things to look for and did you get confused here? Did you like this here? Like how could we have changed this? And we do the exact same thing with our peer review. So our peer review, I think, is hands down the top in when it comes to these type of courses because it is basically straight from studio peer reviewing, and it is based off of, and it's very informative and learning, and you can learn just off that stuff. And then from there, they do their second draft. After their second draft, that's when Rudy and I, my TA, will come in, and we will basically go there as professionals, and we're leads, and we would say, okay, hey, heads up this, heads up this, heads up this, heads up this, great job here, okay, change this here, adjust this here, like, hey, you can't talk about something that the player saw if the player didn't see it. You can't reference that. Now, an NPC can talk about the past. An NPC can talk about, the battle that happened, like 2 weeks ago or something like that. But a player character cannot talk about something that the player did not see themselves. Now, they can talk about world lore, but they shouldn't be the one, right? Because the player is now taken over that body and the player has not experienced it. And now if they saw it in the opening sequence, that is different. If they see, the battle in the opening sequence, they can reference it. They can talk about that. If they know who the enemy is, that's fine. But when it comes to world lore, that's something they should be learning. That's something that should be dropped on their knowledge that they should be absorbing over time. Now, once they learn that knowledge, then they can talk about it to another NPC to ask questions and engage. But if they haven't if they haven't seen it, experienced it, or been told it, they can't reference it. And that's a major mistake that I see a lot of writers doing is that they try and have the player character be the voice of the world, which it disconnects from the player because the player themselves don't know what's happening, and the player's like, how did I know that? And if I did know that, why am I doing this? Why didn't I just go right there, right? And so that's where the disconnect, and you want that immersion, right? So it's really important to develop the scenarios between the characters. Now, it's also important to remember that this is not the first time that the character, sorry, not the player. It's important to remember that this is not the first time that character has been in this world. So if the character goes to a doctor of their village, that more than likely that doctor's the one who birthed them. Right. That's the doctor who, birthed, helped their father or whatever. Right. So that connection should be there. Right. So an easy way to do it is just say, hey, hi, Gerald. Hi, Kelly. Boom. We know each other. And that connection's automatic. It's there. Right. And then from there, you can drop some world lore and remember that, or, in that way that the player could, the player character could technically talk about, when they were a child, right? And then have the older person, the doctor character, relay that, oh, you've always been, like clumsy or whatever like this, or what have you gotten yourself into this time, right? Because that personality, that character's there, right? Now, if they've not met the person before, then obviously that's where you have to develop that I'm from this side, you're from this side. We have different ideas, we have different reasons, we have different values, all these things, and that's where you develop their clash. But it's really, really important to lean on the world history of these characters, to create connections between these characters, but then also remind yourself that the player needs to experience these things, not tell these things, because they are learning as they're going.
Wonderful. That's fantastic advice. I want to bring you back now and talk about establishing connection between avatar and player and how you keep that, because that's a whole other thing. That's brilliant. I love that. That's cool. But we need to wrap this one up, buddy. Okay. That's perfect. That puts a pin in that for me. You've answered my philosophical question last time you were here, so I had to brainstorm a new one just to have something in the spot, because I like getting a little philosophical. So let's talk about voice. As storytellers, regardless of medium, we can shape our characters' words, their voices, their identities. How do you view and handle the responsibility of being a writer when it comes to giving voices to characters of diverse, marginalized backgrounds, or even just fantasy characters that don't exist in the real world, cyborgs, etc.? How do you handle the responsibility of making those authentic and respect the real source material?
Yeah, so this is where it gets tricky, right? Is because I can't express something that I have not been through, right? And so it's not my job to I can support, I can advocate, but I didn't go through those experiences, so I should not be the one to put that voice through, right? Now, what I do is I can put it through a character I'm doing, but obviously I need to talk to people. I need to talk to people who've been in that situation. Just same thing if you're going to write somebody from a different gender, or you're going to write somebody from a different race, is that you just feed it through them. Let them have a look at it. Typically, obviously, start with your team. Start with your team first. Don't share anything that you're working on in the studio, outside the studio, obviously. But that's where you start with, and then you run it through them. But also, even then, you have to be very careful not to just go through one source, right? Because they have different perspectives and experiences as well, right? And they might also have a different agenda than what you're trying to push, right? And so that's where it's really important to just represent in the way that you do your work as a writer. You do your research. You run it through your editing process. You run it through your internal approval process, and stuff like that, right? And so that's where you kind of come across. It's also really important to remember that as a writer, we can't or shouldn't do anything that goes against the morals or values of the company that we are representing and the studio that we're representing. And so that's where it's also another important thing, where we might have our own agenda to bring in, but if it's not the agenda of the studio, then obviously there'll be pushback, there'll be issues, there'll be HR will be brought in, communications will be brought in. So it's really important to remember that you're not representing yourself, you're representing the studio and the brand and the IP you're working on, right? And so if it is an IP, obviously there'll be IP people, HR people, that will walk you through that, what you can and can't do. They'll also more than likely write your stuff. You'll basically say what you wanted to say. They will finally, like for example, Mickey Mouse. They will literally go in there and write Mickey Mouse text for you. You just basically say, hey, you'll write your sample vote, because they don't want to go ping pong back and forth too much. They literally will go in there and say, no, this is what Mickey would say. Okay, then that's what Mickey said. And so that's exactly what you have to do, right? And so it's important to remember that you're representing the brand, you're representing the studio. Now, if it's a brand new IP, if you're doing your own thing, those are two different things that you can look at, and you can go as big or as small as you want. But same thing. If it's not your experiences, don't act like they are. And so that's where you need to do your research. Find out, like how does this affect people? Like how does this affect different people? And if you're talking about LGBT, have communications, have conversations, right, with multiple people, and then see if that's the voice you want to get across, or if you want to adjust it, or if you want to go a different route, right? And so that's where you just sort of determine these things based off of doing your research as a writer. Same thing if you're going to write about military stuff, you gotta do your research, right? You got to know exactly what type of weapons, what type of lingo, because if you don't, the audience will know, and they'll chastise you for it, right? And so it's important to do your research, regardless if you're doing political stuff or eco stuff or whatever you're going to do. You just have to do your research and find, but the same thing, don't get it from one source, get it from multiple sources. Don't just rely on ChatGPT, or AI for your answers, because they are wrong more often than not. And also they're not going to be the one blamed. You will be the one blamed. And so it's important to do your research as a writer. This is where you just start understanding that there are different perspectives for these different things. And as a straight white male, I can't write these from my perspective alone. I have to learn from other people's perspective. But you have to research, communicate, talk, and find out what these different perspectives are and how they would handle it. Also, how would they react to different situations, and how they would talk in different situations, right? And all these different things. And so it's really important to do your homework and do your research.
Fantastic advice. Agreed. Yes, indeed. Well, my friend, we're getting close to the end here. I do like to open up, as I told you before, a little bit of space for signal boost, what you're working on, anything you've done in the past you want to share. Talk to me about GameDesignSkills.com. What's going on, buddy?
Yeah, so Age of Mythology was my Age of Mythology DLC. Immortal Pillars was the most recent work I've done that is actually out. It's announced. It's playable. It was a fun project to work on, so that was really neat. It's a game you can download that I worked on recently. Then we're almost done the first session of my game writing narrative design bootcamp. We're on week 8 of 12, and so yeah, it's really good that we're ramping up, ramping down. The amazing progress the students are doing. They've learned everything from world building to dialogue to character creation, location design, all these things. Now we're getting into learning how to do opening sequence scripts and voiceover scripts as well, which are completely different than an actual regular script. How to work with a voiceover, and then also same with localization scripts. And then we're going to start just developing their portfolios and getting them out and polished and getting prepared for interviews and the job market. So that's really fun and exciting. And the second round of it will be starting in June. So we'll take a month off in May, and then in June we'll be back up for another 3 months with new students. And it's available for American students. So we do American timeline, and that is all the Americas, so North and South America, in that time zone. And then we also do Europe and Asia time zone as well. So I'm doing it twice. So it's same material. So don't worry about that. Same materials, same guest speakers, same TAs and courses and stuff. And yeah, so we're really excited for that. Game design skills itself, with their Funsmith Discord. They're doing free bi-weekly player test sessions, which is really cool, where you can actually submit your game for player test, or you can actually join the player test, and then give feedback, which is great because it gives you experience for that. You can add that to your resume, which is cool. It gives you an insider, as well as that. We're also going to have a bunch of keynote speakers coming up, where I'm going to do a talk on storytelling in video games, and storytelling 101 for video games. And then we also got Mike will be there, Alex will be there, Nathan will be there, so all of our GDS teachers will go, and we'll do different keynote speakers which are all free for the Discord members. And it's Funsmith Club Discord. So so that's some cool things, and I've got some more articles coming out on GDS as well.
Excellent. I will throw all the links down in the doobly-doo so everybody can just click and find all of this amazing stuff. And they should follow you on LinkedIn as well. You share a lot of wisdom over there on LinkedIn, so let's not forget about that.
Yeah, and lots of just Kelly Bender. That's me. That's my face. I share lots of jobs. I share lots of narrative design tips. I share a lot of narrative design jobs. You can also follow the hashtag at hashtag narrative design jobs, and also follow the hashtag narrative design tips. And that's where my tips are. And then I also share lots of jobs that are not narrative design. So all the way, you name it, if it's out there. I typically try and share a lot of remote jobs, because it's just a hard thing for people to relocate nowadays. But yeah, so I just share a bunch of jobs throughout. And yeah, follow me, and yeah.
So like before, as I want to push you out the door, I'd love to give you the parting words of wisdom. You got anything for us?
Just keep at it, man. Like, I did a post this week about is it worth it? Like, am I starting too late in this industry? I didn't actually get into video games until I was in my 40s. like fact. And so the fact that you're jumping in before then, you're already ahead of me. And then, so it's just a matter of just go after it. It's important to remember that it's a slow process, but it's worth it. That also there is no shortcuts. Go through it, learn, absorb as much information as you can, and write and write and write. And then absorb more information, then keep writing, and then just put yourself out there. It's okay to do free work. To get experience, and it's okay to join game jams and stuff like that as well. So yeah, put yourself out there, man.
And that's a wrap on another episode of the Corner of Story and Game. If you enjoyed today's discussion, don't forget to follow the podcast on your platform of choice, leave a comment or review, and hey, come over to the Discord server and join the conversation. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the Corner of Story and Game.